So excited to have another coffee and compliance. And I'm joined with us. Our special guests this month are going to be Mad Security. Traditionally, I bring in a C3PAO and we talk about compliance. However, I thought it would be pretty exciting this month to bring in an external service provider who has recently gone through the CMMC process, can share what that was all about as they got certified for CMMC as an external service provider. So I'd like to welcome both Brad and Jacqueline from Mad Security. Brad, Jacqueline, please introduce yourselves. Maybe just give a real quick intro about Mad Security, and then we'll go ahead and dive into the discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. I'll give a brief description and then introduce myself and let Jacqueline go from there. So, Mad Security is a MSSP, and in that context, an ESP in the CMMC world, and we focus primarily on the defense industrial base. So that's our prime audience as far as who we're trying to deliver security operations services to, as well as compliance services, and for those that want to, from the cybersecurity perspective, technical testing or pen testing as well. I'm the director of operations, so I'm over our security operations center, our compliance team, and then our operations department. Jacqueline?
Okay. Yeah, my name is Jacqueline Jones. I am the compliance lead here at Mad Security. As far as during our C3PO assessment, my main focus was making sure we have the documentation in place, such as, policies, procedures, technical configurations documented, making sure we have the reports for our risk assessment, tabletop, gap assessment, things like that ready to go. And that way I can support the certification efforts that way.
Thanks, Jacqueline. And again, for those of you that don't know me, I am Jamie Loopold. I'm the Director of Channels and Alliances here at PreVeil. I'm also a CMMC certified professional. Jacqueline, I believe you're a CCP as well. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Fantastic. And I think most of the folks on this probably recognize PreVeil, understand who we are. But for those who don't, just real quick, first and foremost, we're a platform for storing, processing, transmitting CUI. I've been in this space since 2019. Not only do we provide the platform, we provide documentation as well as support from our partner community and our own internal compliance department along those trusted partners such as Mad Security. In fact, you can find Mad Security directly in our partner marketplace if you don't want to speak with them after this. And their contact info will be presented at the end of this session as well. And just speaking of, CMMC compliance and the CMMC program, as we know, CMMC is live now. Assessments have been started. They've been underway since January. PreVeil is excited to announce we now have over 20 customers and or partners that have passed the CMMC Level 2 certification. And we've got dozens more that are lined up and getting in the process. So that kind of leads us, to today's topic, which is kind of taking a look at it through just a slightly different spin. But that is the process of an external service provider going through CMMC Level 2 for their own certification. So Brad, Jacqueline, really excited you're able to join us this month and talk a little bit about the process that you guys, I think just finished up just a few weeks ago, if I recall correctly. And what I'd like to do is just, for the audience sake, have you talk through some of the key challenges, some of the things, the recommendations that you would have for folks in the audience that might either be going through this as an external service provider themselves, or they work with an external service provider and they might want to give them some suggestions on, if they'll need to undertake this type of certification or not. And if they do choose that, what to pay attention to. So I guess, the first question I would have, for Brad and Jacqueline, and by the way, we do have questions that we'll get to that were sent in advance of this. But if anyone does have questions, for the group here, please use the Q&A functionality. We will get to and answer as many questions as possible. And as always, one of the things with coffee and compliance is at the end of this, Brad, Jacqueline, I'll let you choose who submitted the best question, and that person will win a $25 gift certificate for the coffee provider of their choice, Starbucks, Dunkin's, whatever we can find online. Um, so that said, let's just kind of start at a kind of top down approach. Brad, Jacqueline, I guess first of all, what led Mad Security to choose to actually go for a CMMC Level 2 certification? As we know, because you don't directly store, process, transmit CUI, you're an external service provider. You're not required to do that. But what made the business decision for Mad Security to go ahead and pursue your own CMMC Level 2 certification?
The As I stated earlier, is that our primary audience of who we try to serve is the defense industrial base, and so because of that, it's very important to us that we do the same certification they do, right? If we're saying and helping them to do things that are written out, and these are the things they must follow, and yeah, we may not be required to do it, but we were prepared to do it. And from our very beginning of focusing on, at the beginning, DFAR 7012, um, still doing those things because it's the right thing to do to secure the DIB, and then in return goes directly to enabling our clients to do what they do best, which is to serve the warfighter.
That's great. So it really came down to the classic saying you wanted to, kind of eat your own dog food.
Yep.
Right. If you're going to be helping the DIB get certified, you felt it was important to be certified yourself. Now, one of the interesting things, one of that we discussed leading up to this call is that as an external service provider, because you're not directly scoping, as an OSC, your scope is really all around following the CUI. But as an external service provider, one of the things that you brought up that I thought was interesting is that because you're not directly handling CUI, what you're really scoping is the services that you're going to be providing to your customers. And that includes, a lot of different technologies. Of course, PreVeil being one of those. But how did you kind of go about scoping? Because obviously that's a little bit of a different exercise as an ESP versus an OSC.
The way we did it and the way we included Prevail in that scope as well, just to cover kind of two things here, is that MAD considers ourselves a client of ourselves. So if we offer a service to someone that then has a corresponding share responsibility matrix for that service, we then implement that in our own environment. And that was part of our assessment scope to make sure that if it's a service we offer, the service offering that we offered was indeed assessed against the same SRM that would be if it was a client being assessed for their CMMC certification on a service that we offered to them. So with that being said, we're Prevail helped us quite a bit in that, is that we don't actually have CUI in this case. We do not store, process, or transmit CUI. We do have a lot of security protection data because of the nature of what we do. It's very hard to do security services without having logs. And so what Prevail offered us to do is to include Prevail as part of that scope, not the entirety of the scope, but part of the scope of how we could answer how we have the capability to store, process, and transmit CUI. And then the SRM covered those other security protection asset parts that are part of protecting that system.
That's great. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think you ended with a really key word there that we're going to hear throughout this discussion here today is that SRM, the shared responsibility matrix. Can you talk a little bit about, I guess, both how yours is crafted for your customers and why that was important for CMMC, as well as the importance of ensuring that you got the SRMs from organizations like Prevail, what that process was like, and how important that was to your overall assessment success.
Yeah, and now as far as getting them, I want Jacqueline to share the story of getting them, getting the extra SRMs. So Jacqueline, I'll let you talk about kind of what that process looked like.
Sure. So one of the things we had to do is Prevail is FedRAMP equivalent. So we had to also get the body of evidence from Prevail. So that was fairly painless. We sent a request. We got it the same day. That was fairly easy. We also had to get the CRM for Microsoft. That was not as easy. So the way you do that is you send a request to a specific email address, and they respond and they ask you some questions, and you get back, and then they give you access to it. So one of the lessons we learned is do not wait to the week of your CMC assessment to send that request, because we literally got it like 4 days into our assessment. So that was definitely a lesson learned.
That's great. Yeah. And how does that then map to kind of the SRM then that you're providing your customers, and how did you scope that, for your assessment boundary?
Yeah, so it's interesting when a provider has other providers, and how that potentially cascades on one another. And so what you have to do is obviously make sure that you can answer your SRM that you say you're being assessed against for your clients in an ESP context. And then for a lot of other providers, for instance, when you look at the SIM we use, or is a very important part of doing SOC operations, potentially what kind of information are they going to have? Now our provider happens to be FedRAMP moderate, so it was a fairly straightforward thing. And I think that's key to it, is the technologies you're picking and the providers you're picking to be part of your service provider offering have to fall in line, have to have an SRM. You can't assume they do. You're not going to have to sit there and create one for someone. You want to have a very articulated and easy in picking providers that do understand the defense industrial base, do understand what you're doing. And if you say the words SRM, they don't go, "What's that?" So being very intentional from a service provider perspective, as you're looking at what partners you're going to bring on, as you're going to be looking at what technologies to bring on to manage environments or to do the service and provide it, pay attention to how they do business. Do they have an SRM, and how does that impact what you offer?
I think that's great advice. And again, the key takeaways that I got from that is, when you're building out your team, because really, as a service provider, you're teaming up with other organizations, other technology providers to provide the services that you do. Make sure you go with folks that know the space that you're going to be serving. And it sounds like MAD, security was very intentional on selecting partners, including PreVeil, including your SIM provider, other technology providers that understand the space and live and breathe in this space. So I think that's great. That makes a lot of sense. Let's dive now actually into the assessment. I would just love to hear, just some of the key takeaways, learnings, maybe things that worked well, maybe some things that were surprising, and any, tips and tricks for the audience.
I cannot stress enough the importance of doing kind of a dry run of what the assessment's going to be. And what I mean by that is not just going through and be like, "Oh yeah, we've checked the box. Yeah, we can talk to this." Getting down to the objective and saying, "Okay, this objective, I'm going to show this document. It is located here, and this person on my team is going to talk about it." Because it's very easy to get into the assessment and you're being bombarded with questions and requests, and you forget your entire game plan of what you're going to talk about, how you're going to talk about it. And you let the assessor start making determinations for you instead of you describing and giving what you've done. And that's my biggest takeaway. And we we did wait. We've had an SSP for a very long time, from it dates back to DFARS days, of what MAD system looked like and how it's evolved over time, and how different things have moved in and out, and what that looked like, how we added things to scope, and things of that nature that has developed over time. And then taking all that, and then really what we did is we waited a little too late, in my opinion, to do a dry run. And Jacqueline can kind of speak to what that looked like from the last week, right before we had to submit the documentation, of what we did and how beneficial it was, other than we should have done it a little bit earlier.
Right. So we all gathered in our conference room on a Friday. It was Brad, myself, and the rest of our compliance team. And essentially what we did is we have a big TV in the conference room. So we pulled up our SSP. We went through a control by control, objective by objective, and we verified everything was correct. So if it was something said that was in documentation, we then pulled up side by side that exact documentation to make sure it was exactly what it said it should be. If there's a technical configuration, we verified that. And so we just went through, like I said, objective by objective, and it was a very time-consuming process, but it did save us a lot of time, I believe, in the future because we did find some issues we needed to fix. And so that saved us in remediation efforts later on. But that being said, another of our lessons learned is do not try to do that one day because we were here way late into the evening and it was a lot to get done in one day. So I would suggest at least putting that over 2 days just to save your sanity.
And that's coming from an organization that's had an SSP and done this multiple times. We assess ourselves internally every year. And you think you're ready, but doing that dry run and really focusing on it like that way, you come out with a completely different outlook than you would if you're just doing a self-assessment sometimes.
So I'm hoping Jeremy at least, bought you guys some pizzas if they were keeping you in the office for a very long time going through that mock assessment.
A lot of coffee.
By the way, Jeremy's the owner of Mad Security for those that don't know. So I think you brought up, a really good point though, in that a lot of people say, well, I want to do like a gap assessment, but really and that's a little bit different because that's really looking more at the controls, which controls do we meet, which do we not. But I think what you're referring to is really more of like a mock assessment, and seems like an internal mock assessment where you built out the team of folks that were going to be responsible, have different roles in this assessment, making sure everybody understood their part that they were going to play. Because we know assessors, will interview different folks. They may want them to demonstrate things. They may want to observe, and they may want to read the documentation. So, between the interview, examine, and test, that can bring in a lot of different team members. And if one team member is supposed to say X and they say Y, that could lead to problems in the assessments. So I think that's a really smart strategy that you did to do kind of like a rehearsal of the assessment, right before it was going to take place. It sounds like you probably would have preferred to do it a little bit earlier and spread it out over a couple of days rather than cramming it in.
Yeah, the one other thing to add there, Jamie, is we've noticed this because not only have we gone through an assessment ourselves, we've been part of assessments with clients. And depending on what services they have, sometimes we actually sit side by side with them and we help them go through the assessment. In those cases, what I have noticed, and being the kind of the primary point of contact for our assessment, is that when an assessor, again, they're looking at your documentation, they're looking at the control objectives, and they're making some determination and trying to come up with a request to you of what you should show. Right? They can't really give you any advice. They can't give you recommendations. They're just doing their best they can to request something. That request does not mean that is exactly what you have to show. It means that they are just doing the best they can. And so the reason that playbook is so important to come up with and know what you're going to show is that if for some reason you can't show what they're asking, you know what your SSP says, you know what you said you were going to show, and you know who is going to show it. You turn it around and say, hey, we're going to show this, which answers how we do it. And as long as you meet the control, you've documented, you meet the intent, then you're good to go. Or I've seen clients mess up, and we almost did this ourselves, is to take that request as that is exactly what you have to show, and it's not. So just that's a huge takeaway I had of why I think the dry run for us was so successful, is it put us in a position to pivot during the assessment.
Got it. No, that's great. So I think you were so well prepared and you knew what you needed to demonstrate and how to pass the assessment. But if you were leaving that up to the assessor could lead you down a path that you don't want to go down. And that could lead to some challenges. So because you knew what you needed to do to show how to demonstrate that you were compliant, you were able to have more control over the assessment process, still, meeting, of course, the assessor's objectives, but steer them down the path that you had kind of laid out ahead of time.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean you're hiding anything. That's not right on what I'm saying. It's just that sometimes, like for instance, if you're trying to show, hey, we have data retention for this amount of time, the assessor may say, show me something from that time period. Well, in reality, the capability is what you have to show. So the configuration that is in place to do that.
Got it. Got it. Yep. That makes a lot of sense. So, again, congrats on passing and getting your CMMC level 2 certification. What does that now kind of mean for Mad Security, for your customers, for our joint customers? I know we've got several joint customers together. Certainly appreciate the partnership, but just, yeah, what does that mean, moving forward now?
I think the biggest thing it means that we've seen from our clients is one, they've been very excited for us. Obviously, it's and for them, as a lot of them are looking towards being level 2 themselves. It kind of gives them that confidence that the MSSP they've chosen in our stance, as well as with PreVeil being in our boundary, if they're a PreVeil customer as well, that they know that one, Matt as a SOC compliance provider can also show and knows how to answer the questions that may come up about PreVeil, that may come up about the solutions that are in place. We've had a couple of assessments that were certifications assessments after we got ours, and while they can't just take your L2 certification and say, oh, everything's good. That's not how it works. But what does happen and is a little more cleaner is certain things around specific engineering aspects of, let's say, our STEM of data retention, things of that nature, that we haven't had to go as in depth because they know that we've already been certified for that specific configuration, which also applies to that client. If we have to show them a log that's specific to the client, we still have to do that. We can't just say, hey, we're certified, the logs are good. That doesn't work.
Got it. Got it. That makes sense. Great. Well, yeah, this has been, really helpful, and I really appreciate you sharing your story. We do have a lot of questions to get to, so I think we're going to jump to the Q&A portion now. And Seth, if folks do want to get in touch with the MAD team or with PreVeil, I think we have some contact info we can put up. And what we found is that I think because this was kind of a specific theme and a specific use case this month, the questions all kind of centered in similar areas. So we'll probably, take some at a bit more high level in categories. And then as people add more specific questions during the live Q&A, of course, we'll get to those as well. But, one of the questions that was asked by a few different folks is, if I'm an external service provider, do I need to get CMMC compliant? Um, you know, and I think the answer there is you do not, right? That was made very clear in the scoping guide. If you are an ESP, well, and I should caveat that an ESP is a very broad umbrella. So ESP does include cloud service providers, managed service providers, consultants, MSSPs. Really, it's a very broad category. So we should carve that to if I am a ESP that is not a cloud service provider. PreVeil, certainly is a cloud service provider. As Jacqueline mentioned, we are FedRAMP moderate equivalent. If you're a cloud service provider and you store, process, transmit CUI, you must either be FedRAMP authorized or FedRAMP moderate equivalent. If you're not a cloud service provider and you store, process, transmit CUI, or security protection data in the case of managed security, it's not required that you become certified, but it is, a business decision. And as Brad and Jacqueline mentioned, Mad Security, because this is their primary business, they made that decision and went that route. So yeah, and again, it breaks down to if you're a cloud service and you store, process, transmit CUI, and that's again a big takeaway there. If you're a cloud service and you only store and process and transmit security protection data. For example, Brad's, the SIM solution that they use that just looks at logs, or maybe, vulnerability management or an AV solution. Those don't necessarily have to be FedRAMP as long as they're not actively storing, processing, transmitting CUI. It's only FedRAMP requirement when you bring that CUI into the category. But that said, you know, as an MSP, MSSP, certainly you can choose to obtain that CMMC level 2 cert for the, betterment of your customers. Just And anything to add there, Brad, Jacqueline? I think it's pretty cut and dry, but be curious if you had anything else to add.
No, Jamie, I think you summarized it well, and it's really what it came down to for us. It there's so many. It's just in the space as it's been kind of evolving, and as CMC has been evolving, and where things have changed. For us, doing it solidified that no matter what evolves and changes potentially in the future with it, if it's going to be required of the client, if we're going to be heavily involved with them, if we're going to consult other people on how to do this, it is best to, as we said earlier, eat your own dog food and do it. It because if you're saying that you're doing these things compliance in order to secure something, then why not prove in a way that you are actually securing what you say you're doing?
Absolutely. And I think that, leads to a good question that was brought up. And, we do work with a lot of small, mid-sized businesses. You know, budgets are tight. Organizations, are slow to make change. And, one of the questions that we got is how do you, get organizations? And I think this typically is especially a question for upper management and leadership. How do you get them to take CMMC seriously, with all the other all the other challenges that businesses are facing? How do we get them to understand that CMMC is real, it's important? Obviously, you guys identified that yourself, that your customers are all focused around the DIB. But are you having those types of conversations with small businesses that aren't convinced that CMMC is real, is here to stay?
Um, I would think for a lot of our clients, they get it. Um, it's not always the case. You'll still hear it from time to time. Oh, is this actually going to ever happen? We've been in this space for a while, so it's one of those things that we've seen kind of how it all played out. It's very easy if you're kind of external from it, you start to feel like, where is this going? Why is this nothing happening with it? But you can clearly see over time what's occurred. And while there may have been like little stepping stones, there have been consistent forward movement towards where we are today. And I would say that while it again seems like there's that pause, that doesn't mean there's not forward movement. And I think the fact that you actually see what I think is up right at 100 people that are actually certified at the moment, that's still forward movement in the right direction. And so whether you feel that way or not, I don't. In many cases, where I say to clients is, you may feel that, but I don't think you're right. I think that you're looking at something that is going to come, is going to happen, and it doesn't negate DFARS anyway. So these things that, yeah, you're getting certified to do, you should be doing anyway. And I would say that we did see last year an increase in DIBCAC high for clients. Again, we've dealt mostly with the defense industrial base, so we've been part of several of those, as well as just this year a little more focus on DIBCAC medium assurance, where they're asking for all the documentation. They could do that in a very short amount of time. So whether you're looking at CMMC or not, DFARS is still a thing. You're still required to do it. It's the same control set.
Thanks. And I would add on to that too. What we've seen an uptick, if you just follow closely the certain news reports, is the False Claims Act. So we are seeing an increase in the cyber fraud division going specifically after, as you mentioned, DFARS. Obviously, they can't go after you for CMMC yet, but we are seeing an uptick specifically in DFARS 7012 cyber fraud cases. So I know there's been several that have been settled this year, and it seems like we're quite frankly at the tip of the iceberg because it is a revenue generator for the DOJ, and with the whistleblowers getting a significant portion of that, I don't think they'll have a lack of willing participants, unfortunately. And I think the other big driver, of course, is Katie Arrington becoming the CIO at the DoD. For those that haven't been in this space for the last 6 years, I'm sure Mad Security certainly knows Katie Arrington well. We knew Katie Arrington well, back in 2018, 2019, when CMMC 1.0 was just kind of coming into the fold, into the picture. And of course, Katie Arrington was the main driver, of the original CMMC program And she's made it very clear that CMMC is not going away. It's here to stay. Really important to the defense industrial base. Um, so, you know, when we go back to kind of the specific of your assessment, some of the questions that we got were around, how did the assessors actually want to see your evidence? And I think, we all often hear about, being prepared for the assessment. You can have screenshots, they might interview, or they can even ask you to actually demonstrate a control. Brad, I think you and Jacqueline, you had some firsthand experience with this. So if you could just share a little bit more about kind of how particular and what type of evidence the assessors were looking for.
Yeah, well, so Jacqueline, I'll let you can speak to the documentation portion of it, like how we had to provide that. But the demonstration is what our C3 focused on, of not just a screenshot of this, but show me. And one of the most interesting things that take away from this, and I guess just as I don't know why it caught me off guard, but it caught me off guard. And thankfully, we do what we say we do. But when we had to show like a list of accounts, or that we do role-based access, and we do role-based access in a certain way based on tiers in our SOC, is that our C3PO wanted us to actually open those groups, not just and then show them and go through each of those and just show that we truly have people in those groups, and they're not the same person, and that everybody's not in all the groups. And so really, if you say you do role-based, if you say you do those things to meet it, really do it, and make sure that you could demonstrate that, because from a assessment perspective, demonstration of that I thought was a fantastic way to do it, and it really proved that from Mad Security's perspective that we really do operate in that manner. And if you're not ready for that, then it could potentially be an issue for you. So
That's great. And Jacqueline, anything to add there?
Just other than the documentation, we provided a lot of documents ahead of time. We gave them our signed policies and some procedures we already had in place. And then anything we mentioned in the assessment, if we hadn't already provided a copy of, there's certain things that they did say, can you provide a copy of that as well? Other things were, like we mentioned, we did a risk assessment, and then they asked us to pull up the report and kind of walk through it on the screen. Tabletop exercises the exact same way. So yeah, I mean, that's essentially what it was, is if you have it documented, we haven't provided a copy to them, they asked to see it.
Got it. Got it. Great. Here's one, Brad, Jacqueline, specifically for you, and choose to answer this or not, but it was posted. What SIM solution did you select? I don't know if you can speak to that or not.
yeah, we can speak to it.
Okay.
We utilize Elastic, and we do Elastic Security, and it's an Elastic Gov Cloud, so it's in their FedRAMP moderate offering.
Excellent. There's another question that we got. As an external service provider that doesn't store CUI, was it hard to explain to an assessor that there were things that didn't really apply to you? So I think obviously because you're not directly handling CUI, that, as we mentioned, kind of changes your assessment scope. But at the same time, because you are offering services that a traditional OSC, isn't responsible for, I would think it probably just changed kind of the flow of your assessment a little bit. Is that kind of fair to say?
It is, and what we did is we basically created fake documents in a way, and we were able to demonstrate of where they flowed and where they were stored. And we had a document. It was our CUI authorization process of like how we authorize users to have access to CUI, what group they get added to, how they are verified they have training, then what additional controls potentially get added to their device, which also then at the same time would push PreVeil to their device. There's certain things we did to make sure that we had it clearly marked of how we would do that. And then we just had fake documents in there to be able to show that we couldn't do certain things with them, or that we could do certain things with them.
Got it. Got it. That makes sense. Just jumping around a little bit here. I've got another good question that was, this is really more about the NIST V2 versus V3. For just folks that aren't aware, CMMC and DFAR 7012 requires that you're compliant with NIST 800-171 version 2, and that's been hard coded into the regulation. Question came up, when will NIST 800-171 v3 become mandatory? And the answer is when the DoD, creates a new rule effectively. And they have said that it will be changed through rulemaking. It will not just be changed through a memo. So I think, that means that it is going to be, in the foreseeable future, will be at CMMC V2. And the DoD has signaled that when it does move to V3, there will be a grace period. I would expect it probably at least 12 months that we'll know before V3 becomes mandatory. Could be shorter than that, but I would suspect that between the actual process to get the rule completed and then get it grandfathered in, I would be shocked if it was less than 12 months. Brad, Jacqueline, I don't know if you have anything else around there that you've heard about V3, and maybe are you guys even planning or looking at V3?
I would say what we're looking at it from the perspective of, and really what to add here is obviously with V2, there's a lot of things that are left up to organization to define as objectives of certain things. And it's hard to know what the DoD expects or what what is best way to do it. And so what is been the most valuable that I've seen is that the DoD has released the ODVs, so the organization defined values for what's going to be used in the ODPs for revision 3. That information, while it's not set in stone yet, it is required in revision 2 or even assessed against for CMMC. If you are trying to determine what you're going to execute towards, it is a very good base to start with and use as that foundation if you don't know what to define, because it eventually will be what you have to define.
I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah, the ODVs that were just recently published, I think about a month ago or so it was. We've also taken a look at that, and we're of the same mindset that as we build out our own internal processes and moving forward, that we will align to those as well. So that's great. Just a couple other questions here, and then we will wrap up. This one, kind of straightforward, is the display that is presenting CUI does not allow for processing, storing, or transmission. Is that considered a CUI asset or in scope? And I think the DoD has been pretty clear here, is that if that display is tied to like a virtual desktop infrastructure where it is purely displaying the information, they define it as keyboard, video, mouse. But it does not have it, it's not actually processing it itself. It's being processed in a virtual desktop infrastructure. Then that particular asset is considered completely out of scope. Obviously, the virtual desktop infrastructure where you're storing, processing, transmitting CUI, that has to be secured, to the same rigor, the same controls that you would otherwise typically have to satisfy yourselves, the 110 controls of INR 171 Rev 2. And Brad, Jacqueline, you guys do not use any virtual desktop infrastructure, correct?
We don't internally. There's certain we've had help certain clients do it, and there's always the caveat where you have that it's out of scope if properly configured.
Yeah.
You can't allow information to flow from that EDI environment over to that asset. So things of like if you're using RDP or any type of thing of that nature, you can't allow it to map drives. You can't allow it to do certain things. You can't allow it to print. Printing is another thing you got to be really, really particular about. That the DIPCAC is focused heavily on, especially during JSVs. C3PA is focused heavily on. If you allow work from home, you have to also worry about the printing aspect of it. Even in an environment like ourselves as an ESP, if they're a CY asset and we're saying we don't actually have physical copies of it, we have to prevent that from occurring. And so getting down to can you create the physical copy of something comes into play as well.
Got it. Yep, that makes sense. Let's see. Did you, or I guess, did your C3PAO for your assessment require the workstations you access to your FINRA moderate SIM be considered in scope and secured at the same level as CUI assets? I think those would probably be CRMA best because they wouldn't have CUI if they're just accessing SPA. Did that come into play at all? How you were managing the endpoints connecting to your SIM?
Yeah, so we treated them, they got the same control set outside of access to PreVeil and some other very specific things that were just CUI specific. But the overarching control was applied directly to that asset, just like it would be if it would had been a CUI asset in our environment. So from our perspective, we did that because again, it's kind of the best thing to do. There's no reason, in my opinion, not to do it. Otherwise, what are you really doing? Yeah, it's one of those things that what are you really securing or trying to prove at that point, if you're not actually securing that endpoint?
Yep. Did you actually scope them as contractor risk managed assets, or did that not come into
They were labeled as CRMA.
Okay, perfect. That's what I would suspect. Okay, here's one. Did Mad Security use Microsoft Commercial to cover remaining objectives that PreVeil doesn't cover, particularly for Intune and Entra policies, since Microsoft Commercial isn't FedRAMP compliant? So I think in this particular case, there's two ways to answer this. Brad, Jacqueline, I believe what you had mentioned from your perspective, you included PreVeil as a service offering in your scope. You have several other technologies similar to PreVeil that you also offer customers, you support for customers because you have a very diverse customer base. So in this instance, you weren't using PreVeil exclusively for your CMMC, like a customer would, and like many of our joint customers do. So I'm actually going to answer it more from the latter perspective. And let's just assume we have a joint customer that's using the Mad Security SIM and your endpoint management. They're also using, let's say, Intune and Entra plus PreVeil. And I think what's important to cover there is PreVeil is their platform for storing, processing, transmitting CUI. That is where the CUI lives. That is what has to be FedRAMP or FedRAMP moderate equivalent. Intune, Entra, there's a couple things there. Number one, they do run on the Azure commercial, which is FedRAMP compliant. They're not running in the Microsoft commercial. They're kind of separate from that. So they do meet the FedRAMP, even though they don't technically have to meet FedRAMP because they're SPDs. They are not providing any sort of protection for they're not storing, processing, transmitting CUI directly. And I assume, that's kind of similar, the approach that our joint customers take that are going down that particular path. Is that correct?
It is. I mean, to answer the point, to answer the question directly, yes, we actually did use commercial in this case for majority of it. Our scope was included more than that, as Jamie mentioned, but our base of Intune, things of the nature, was in the commercial tenant.
Great. Okay. Well, that wraps up all the questions. So all that's left, Brad, Jacqueline, is for you to pick your favorite question. I'll just give you a real quick rundown again. One was, what SIM solution did you use? We had one about, as an external service provider that doesn't store any CUI, how did you explain to your assessor, how the controls did apply to you? We talked, obviously, the most recent one about using Microsoft Commercial plus PreVeil plus other services in scope. Were the CRMA for the endpoints connecting to your SIM, NIST 800, 171, V2, V3, and some more general questions that we wouldn't be able to pick a particular person because we had a lot of people ask the same questions around external service providers and do they need to be CMMC compliant. So we will skip that one. But if you have a favorite out of the ones I just mentioned, that would be great.
I want to say that the question about CRMA, because we actually debated internally a little bit of like, how is that going to fall? Is it actually SPA because we're using it to protect? What is it? And we settled CRMA, and that's what we were assessed. So I think it was a great question because from a provider perspective, that determination is kind of hard to figure out what it is, especially if you don't have CUI.
That's great. Yeah. And I love the way that you guys answered that. And that's exactly how I would have answered it. So I'm glad that we aligned there. Well, that wraps up the May Coffee Compliance. Thanks again from the Mad Security team. I really enjoyed having you on to tell your unique story of becoming one of the first few external service providers to become CMMC Level 2 certified. Thanks everyone that attended, and hopefully we'll see you all next month.